The coffee pot trembled in Natalie Harper's grip, not from fear, but from the weight of holding it for the past 40 minutes without a refill break. Thursday mornings at the Silver Creek Diner followed a rhythm she could set her watch by truckers, at 5:30 construction crews at 6:15, in the breakfast rush that never quite materialized anymore, now that the highway bypass had opened 2 years back. She moved between tables with practiced efficiency, her body operating on autopilot, while her mind wandered to the stack of bills waiting in her apartment and the phone call she'd have to make to Dylan's landlord before noon. The diner sat at the junction of Highway 40 and State Route 17, a weather-beaten structure that had served travelers since 1967, according to the faded sign out front. Inside, red vinyl booths lined the windows, their surfaces cracked and patched with duct tape in places where the foam pushed through. The counter stretched along the back wall, 12 stools bolted to the floor in front of a pass-through window where Jake worked the grill, his face perpetually flushed from decades of standing over hot oil and flame. Natalie had been pouring coffee here for 5 years, ever since she dropped out of college in her junior year, when the money ran out and Dylan's addiction had drained what little their mother had left them. She'd been an art major once back when she believed talent and passion could overcome circumstance. Her portfolio still sat in a cardboard box under her bed, 20 canvases she'd never finished, sketches of a life she'd never quite managed to live. Now she sketched occasionally in the margins of order pads during slow hours, muscle memory, keeping her hands busy while her dreams gathered dust. The bell above the door chimed at 7:15. Malcolm Cross walked in first, though she didn't know his name yet. He wore clean jeans and a flannel shirt, unremarkable, except for the way his eyes swept the diner like a security camera cataloging exits and occupants with mechanical precision. He chose booth 7 without hesitation, the corner spot with sightlines to both the front entrance and the kitchen door. Natalie noted it the way she noted everything, filing away details she'd learned to observe from her single year in nursing school before switching to art back when she'd thought she might save lives instead of serving them eggs. She brought him coffee without asking. Black like most of the men who stopped here alone. His hands wrapped around the cup, but he didn't drink. Just held it, letting steam rise between them while his gaze drifted to the parking lot. 20 minutes later, the kid came in. Hoodie pulled up despite the New Mexico heat already building outside, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He moved with the jittery energy of someone running on no sleep and too much caffeine, sliding into the booth across from Malcolm without greeting or acknowledgement. Natalie approached with the coffee pot, but Malcolm held up a hand, palm flat. They wouldn't be ordering yet. The third man arrived at 7:40. He moved differently than the others, older, maybe late 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of stillness that predators have when they're conserving energy. He sat facing the door, his back to the wall, and when his eyes met Natalie's for the briefest moment, she felt something cold slide down her spine. She'd seen enough men pass through this diner to recognize the ones who'd done violence. This one wore it like a second skin. She brought him coffee anyway. He nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement, then turned his attention to the other two. Natalie moved away, refilling the trucker at table 3, checking on Harold at the counter, 75 years old. Vietnam vet, came in every Thursday at 7:30, without fail, to eat scrambled eggs and read the obituaries, checking which of his friends had made it through another week. He showed her pictures of his grandkids every time they visited from Albuquerque, 5 of them, now youngest, just turned 3 months old. She knew their names, their birthdays, the schools they attended. Harold always left exact change, no tip, because his veteran's pension didn't stretch far enough for generosity, and Natalie never mentioned it. Her path to the coffee station took her past booth 7. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The acoustics in the diner just worked that way. Sound carried from the corner booth straight to the spot where she stood refilling the pot, an architectural quirk she'd discovered years ago when a couple had their breakup argument at that exact table, and she'd heard every word from 15 feet away. Malcolm's voice came first, barely above a whisper, but clear enough. Target sits counter always, 7:30 like clockwork. The professional with the ponytail leaned forward. The phrase, "Tell me again." The kid's voice shook slightly. Black coffee, no sugar. That's the signal. Malcolm again. The moment he says it, we move. Victor drops him. We're out before his boys react. Victor, the professional, his voice flat and emotionless. Collateral, Malcolm didn't hesitate. Acceptable. This is war. Natalie's hand froze on the coffee pot. Blood rushed in her ears, loud enough that she almost missed the rest. But her nursing school training kicked in that hyper-awareness she'd learned in emergency rotations, where missing a detail could mean a patient coded. She forced herself to keep pouring to maintain the rhythm of her movements, even as her mind raced through implications. Black coffee, no sugar. Counter seat. 7:30. She knew exactly who they were talking about. The rumble reached them before the bikes did that deep bass growl of multiple engines approaching in formation. Natalie glanced at the clock above the register. 7:28. She'd been counting down to this moment without realizing it, the way you count down to an impact you can't prevent. 6 motorcycles swung into the parking lot in synchronized precision, chrome gleaming in the early morning sun. The Iron Vanguard Motorcycle Club arrived the same way they always did, loud, impossible to ignore, and with enough presence to shift the entire atmosphere of any room they entered. The engines cut simultaneously, that sudden silence, after sustained noise that felt like pressure releasing from a wound. Jackson Mercer dismounted first. At 51, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who'd taken enough hits to respect his body's limits, but still possessed enough strength to be dangerous. Silver threaded through his dark beard, and a scar traced from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone, the kind of mark that told a story he'd never volunteered and she'd never asked about. He wore his Iron Vanguard cut-like armor, the patch on the back visible through the diner's window, a wolf's head over crossed motorcycle parts, black on black leather. 5 men followed him inside. Marcus Ghost Reeves came next, the vice president, 48, but looking older, with the kind of weathered face that came from years on the road and decisions that carved themselves into expression lines. Tommy Wrench Sullivan, the road captain at 35, still carried himself with the swagger of someone young enough to believe in his own invincibility. The other 3 Natalie recognized, but didn't know faces that blurred together after years of quiet nods and occasional pleasantries exchanged over breakfast. They took their positions without discussion. 2 by the door, 1 near the kitchen, standard protocol she'd observed enough times to understand it was about covering exits and sightlines. Jackson walked to the counter to seat number 3, specifically the spot he'd claimed for the 4 years Natalie had been watching this ritual play out. He touched the brim of his cap toward Harold, who nodded back with the respect of one veteran acknowledging another. Then Jackson's eyes found Natalie's. His voice carried across the diner, warm and familiar. "Morning, Nat." How's she moved before he could finish. The coffee pot in her hand gave her an excuse, a reason to lean close that wouldn't register as unusual to anyone watching. She'd served Jackson Mercer coffee 208 times, she'd counted once during a particularly slow shift, calculating the routine in her head like a mathematical proof of consistency. She knew how he took it, knew he'd order the same thing he always did, knew that in approximately 15 seconds, he'd say the exact words 3 men were waiting to hear before they committed murder in her diner. Her voice barely qualified as sound, just breath shaped into words against his ear. "Don't speak. 3 men, booth 7, they're waiting for you to order." Jackson's hand reaching for the Sarger dispenser stopped. Not dramatically, anyone looking would think he'd simply paused to collect his thoughts. But Natalie felt a shift in him, that sudden coiling of attention that changed his entire presence. His eyes didn't move to booth 7. They stayed on her face, reading her with an intensity that made her want to step back, but she held steady. He nodded, a movement so small she might have imagined it. Then Jackson's hand went to his phone, pulling it from his pocket with casual ease. His voice when he spoke carried the same warm tone as before. "You know what, just coffee today. Need to check something on my phone first." He tapped the screen, typing something she couldn't see. 20 feet away, Ghost's phone buzzed. The vice president glanced down, then up, his expression unchanging, but his body shifting subtly. He stretched like a man working out a kink in his back, then murmured something to Wrench. The road captain nodded, rolled his shoulders, and adjusted his position near the door. In 30 seconds, without a single obvious movement, every Iron Vanguard member in the diner had repositioned. Booth 7 was now covered from 3 angles, none of them direct enough to be obvious, all of them close enough to matter. Natalie stepped back, her legs shaking so hard she worried they'd give out. She'd prevented something. What exactly, she couldn't be sure yet, but the weight of it pressed against her chest like a hand. At booth 7, Malcolm's jaw tightened. She watched from the corner of her eye as he leaned back, his posture shifting from coiled readiness to frustrated confusion. The kid looked panicked, his hands trembling as they gripped his coffee mug. Victor remained perfectly still, but his eyes moved cataloging the Iron Vanguard positions, calculating angles running some internal algorithm she couldn't begin to guess at. Malcolm whispered something harsh. The kid responded, voice rising slightly, before Malcolm cut him off with a sharp gesture. Victor said nothing, just watched, and somehow his silence felt more dangerous than the other two's agitation. They stood. Malcolm dropped two 20s on the table, far too much for 3 cups of coffee they'd barely touched, and moved toward the exit. The kid followed, practically tripping over his own feet in his hurry to leave. Victor came last, his movements unhurried, controlled like a man who knew panic was a liability he couldn't afford. As Malcolm passed the counter, his eyes locked on Natalie's. She'd been looking at the register, trying to appear busy, trying to not exist in this moment, but she felt his attention like heat from an open flame. His gaze traveled from her face to her hands, still trembling, wrapped around the coffee pot she'd been holding when she whispered to Jackson, then back to her eyes. Understanding passed between them. He knew. Somehow he knew she'd interfered. Malcolm's voice soft enough that only she heard, "Mistakes have consequences." Then he was gone, the bell above the door chiming his exit, 3 motorcycles roaring to life in the parking lot, disappearing down Highway 40 like they'd never been there at all. The diner felt too quiet. Even with Harold turning pages of his newspaper, Jake scraping the grill in the kitchen, the usual morning sounds all operating normally, it felt like the silence after a gunshot, that ringing absence where noise should be. Jackson stood from his stool, his voice cut through the quiet calm, but carrying an edge that made everyone in the diner pay attention. "Folks, sorry about this, but we need to close up for a bit. Kitchen emergency. Nothing serious, but health code stuff. Y'all understand?" Harold looked up from his obituaries, nodded left, his usual exact change on the counter, and shuffled out. The trucker at table 3 didn't argue, just grabbed his to-go cup and headed for his rig. Within 3 minutes, the diner emptied of everyone except Iron Vanguard and Natalie. Ghost moved to the door, flipped the sign to closed, and turned the lock. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt final. Jackson gestured to the back room, Jake's office, a cramped space filled with supply invoices and a desk that hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. Natalie's feet moved without her conscious input, carrying her through the kitchen, where Jake had already made himself scarce, into the office, where the smell of old coffee and cigarette smoke clung to everything. Jackson sat on the desk's edge. Ghost stood by the door, blocking it without being obvious about it. Wrench leaned against the wall, arms crossed, face unreadable. The silence stretched long enough that Natalie's heart started hammering again. Then Jackson spoke, his voice gentle in a way that somehow made it worse. "Talk, everything." The words spilled out. She recounted the conversation at booth 7, every phrase she could remember, the sequence of events, the way they'd positioned themselves, the way Malcolm had looked at her when he left. Her voice shook, but she kept going, aware that stopping would be worse than continuing, that hesitation would register as unreliability, and she needed them to believe her. When she finished, Jackson studied her in silence. Then, what was the third man wearing? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected thanks, maybe, or anger that she'd put herself at risk, not a test. But she closed her eyes, pulling up the image from memory. Gray ponytail, black leather jacket, no patches, that's wrong for bikers, means he's not affiliated. Boots worn at the heels, military lace pattern. Hands too still when he sat. Most people fidget, adjust, do something. He didn't move unless he had purpose for it. Professional discipline, maybe military background. And she opened her eyes to find Jackson and Ghost exchanging a look. Ghost nodded almost imperceptibly. Jackson's voice carried something that might have been approval. "You're observant." Wrench spoke for the first time. "She's also involved now. They made her." Natalie's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, made me?" Ghost pushed off from the door. "The guy who looked at you on his went out. He knows you intervened, knows you warned King." King. She had heard the nickname before, but never connected it to Jackson. Now it made sense, the way he carried himself, the deference other members showed him, the quiet authority that needed no announcement. Jackson's eyes hadn't left her face. "Why help me? You don't know me." The truth came easier than a lie. "Harold sits 3 seats down from you. He has 5 grandkids. Their pictures are in his wallet because he shows me every Thursday. Emma's 7, starting 2nd grade. Tyler's 5, loves dinosaurs. Baby Sophia just turned 3 months. I know their names, their favorite colors, what they want to be when they grow up, because Harold talks about them like they're the only good things left in his life. She took a breath. I didn't do this for you. I did it because bullets don't ask permission before they kill the wrong people. And I couldn't watch that happen when I knew it was coming. Something shifted in Jackson's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around his eyes that suggested he understood more than she'd said. His voice when he spoke carried weight. You understand what you've done. You're involved now, whether you want to be or not. Before Natalie could respond, Jackson's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his face went stone still, in a way that made her chest tighten. Without a word, he turned the phone toward her. The photo showed her apartment building, 1247 Riverside Drive, the faded numbers visible next to the entrance. The message below read, App 2C, pretty place. For now. The room tilted. Natalie's hands shot out to grip the desk edge, needing the solid reality of it to keep her upright. They knew where she lived. They'd already been there or sent someone or looked it up. The how didn't matter. The fact remained she'd whispered 2 words into Jackson Mercer's ear, and somehow those words had painted a target on her back. Ghost's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. And tell them what you overheard men talking. No crime yet, no proof. By the time cops investigate, you're already dead. Jackson stood, moving closer but not crowding her space. These men aren't amateurs. That third one, the professional, I know that type. Combat discipline, probably military contractor turned freelance. He won't stop because it got complicated. He'll adjust his approach and try again. Natalie's voice came out smaller than she intended. So what do you want from me? The answer was simple and terrifying. Come with us, to the compound, until we figure this out. Every instinct screamed refusal. She'd spent 5 years keeping herself separate from the darker currents that ran through this town, staying surface level, friendly with the Iron Vanguard, but never getting close enough to be pulled under. She had a life limited, yes, constrained by debt and responsibility, but hers. A brother who needed her, bills that wouldn't pay themselves, a shift tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, the routine that kept her afloat even when it felt like drowning. The words formed before she could stop them. I have a life, a brother who needs me. I can't just disappear into your world. Jackson's response came with surprising gentleness. Your brother Dylan, right? 6 months sober next week. You've been covering his rent at the halfway house, picking up extra shifts to afford it. Proud of him for finally getting clean after 3 relapses. Anger flared hot in her chest. You investigated me. Ghost's tone remained flat. We investigate everyone who gets close. It's survival, not personal. Jackson continued as if the interruption hadn't happened. If you're dead, who takes care of Dylan? Who makes sure he doesn't slip again when his support system disappears? The anger drained away, replaced by cold calculation. He wasn't wrong. Dylan's sobriety hung by threads, strengthened only by her constant presence. Her phone calls every other day, her visits twice a week, her ability to pay for the halfway house that kept him in a structured environment. Remove her from that equation and Dylan would spiral. She'd rebuilt him 3 times already. She couldn't do it from a grave. Her phone rang, Dylan's name lighting up the screen. Her hands shook as she answered. Hey, D. What's... His voice panicked, young, stripped of the careful composure he'd been building. Nat, someone was at my apartment, left a note under my door. Ice flooded her veins. What does it say? Paper rustling, then Dylan reading with forced steadiness. Your sister made a mistake. You'll pay for it. The office disappeared. She was aware of Jackson's hand on her shoulder steadying her before she realized she'd been swaying. Aware of Ghost moving closer, his phone already out typing something rapidly. Aware of Wrench's muttered curse from his position by the wall. But none of it felt real, just edges of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her voice, when she found it, sounded like it came from underwater. Bring him too. Both of us. Please. Jackson's response came immediately. Already done. Ghost is sending people to get him now. He'll be at the compound before noon. 30 minutes later, Natalie sat in the passenger seat of Ghost's truck watching Silver Creek Diner disappear in the side mirror. Jake had agreed to close for the day without asking questions, the kind of willful ignorance that came from living in a town where certain things went unspoken to maintain peace. Her apartment keys sat heavy in her pocket, a reminder of a space she might never see again or might return to find destroyed. She'd grabbed nothing except her purse and the sketchbook she kept in her locker, unable to leave behind the one thing that still felt like hers in a world that had just been stolen out from under her. Ghost drove in silence for the first 20 minutes, the landscape shifting from town to desert, scrub buildings giving way to open space punctuated by rock formations and the occasional ranch. Then you did good today. Most people freeze. Natalie stared at the road ahead. I'm terrified. His voice held something that might have been approval. Good. Fear keeps you sharp, keeps you alive. It's when you stop being afraid that you get sloppy. The Iron Vanguard compound appeared after 40 minutes of driving, set back from a dirt road that branched off Highway 40. 50 acres of fenced property cameras, visible on posts every 100 yards, a gate that required a code to open. The main house sprawled across a rise in the landlocked construction that looked more like a hunting lodge than an outlaw headquarters with a wraparound porch and solar panels on the roof. Behind it, a large garage, 6 smaller cabins arranged in a semicircle, and what looked like a workshop with bay doors open to reveal motorcycles in various states of repair. Ghost parked near the main house. Jackson's bike already sat in front, along with 4 others. As Natalie stepped out, the scale of what she'd done finally hit her, not the whisper itself, but the cascade of consequences that had followed. She'd prevented a murder, and in doing so had tied her life to people she didn't know in a world she didn't understand, with rules she'd have to learn just to survive. The front door opened before they reached it. A woman stood in the frame, mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and Jackson's eyes, same shape, same intelligence, different expression. Where Jackson's gaze held calculation tempered by experience, hers carried judgment, sharpened by education. Ghost made the introduction. Izzy, this is Natalie Harper, Natalie Isabella Mercer, Jackson's daughter. Izzy's handshake was firm, her voice cool but not hostile. Dad said you saved his life, thank you. The words carried weight but no warmth. Natalie got the impression of someone who'd learned to be polite without being welcoming, to maintain boundaries in a space that constantly threatened to dissolve them. Inside, the compound revealed itself as more functional than she'd expected. The main room held mismatched furniture that looked comfortable rather than decorative, a kitchen visible through an archway where someone, a woman with graying hair and capable hands, was preparing food, and a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms. Maps covered one wall, pinned and marked with notations Natalie couldn't decipher. A table in the center held coffee cups, ashtrays, and what looked like business ledgers. Jackson stood from the table. Natalie, Dylan's on his way, should be here within the hour. In the meantime, we need to have a conversation. The conversation turned out to be a council meeting. 7 men filed into the main room over the next 10 minutes, taking seats around the table or leaning against walls, and Natalie recognized the hierarchy in their positioning. Those closest to Jackson held more weight. Those near the edges were newer or lower ranked. Ghost took the seat to Jackson's right. Wrench sat across from them. The others filled in gaps. One man stood rather than sat, arms crossed, jaw tight. Maybe 32, with the kind of wiry build that came from labor rather than gyms, and eyes that never quite settled on one target. He'd been watching Natalie since she entered, and his expression held none of the neutral assessment the others offered. This was hostility, pure and direct. Jackson's voice cut through the low murmur of side conversations. Everyone knows why we're here. Natalie overheard a hit planned against me, warned me before it could go down. That warning saved my life, and possibly yours, since a firefight in the diner would have gotten messy fast. He paused, letting that sink in. The men who planned the hit have now targeted her and her brother. They're under our protection until this is resolved. The hostile man, Snake, she'd learn his name later, spoke up. She's a liability. Civilians don't belong here. Her brother's a junkie, for Christ's sake. How long before he needs a fix bad enough to sell us out? Wrench's response came sharp. She saved King's life. That counts for something. Snake didn't back down. And now we got targets on us because of her. Plus another weak link we gotta babysit. How's that a fair trade? Other voices joined in, some supporting Snake's position, others arguing for protection. The conversation escalating until Jackson raised a hand and silence fell like a blade dropping. His voice carried absolute authority. We vote. Standard protocol. Natalie Harper and her brother, do they receive club protection or do we send them away? Ghost called for the vote. Hands went up first for protection, then against. Natalie counted without meaning to 8 for 4 against. The 4 dissenters included Snake and 3 others she didn't recognize, their faces closed and unreadable. Jackson nodded. Protection wins. They stay. Snake's jaw worked like he wanted to say more, but he held it back. The hostility remained, though, radiating from him in waves that made Natalie's skin prickle. The meeting broke up. Men filed out, some offering nods to Natalie that might have been respect or might have been simple acknowledgement. The woman from the kitchen approached, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her voice carried warmth that Izzy's had lacked. "I'm Rosa. Manage things around here. You hungry?" Natalie's stomach reminded her she hadn't eaten since yesterday's dinner shift. "Starving." Rosa smiled. "Good. You're too thin. Come on." In the kitchen, Rosa moved with practiced efficiency, pulling together sandwiches and coffee, while Natalie sat at a small table that looked out toward the cabins. Izzy joined them, sitting across from Natalie with the posture of someone prepared for interrogation. Her voice carried curiosity layered over skepticism. "So, you're an artist, or were—" Natalie blinked at the non sequitur. "How did you—" Izzy gestured to the sketchbook visible in Natalie's purse. "The calluses on your right hand, charcoal and graphite stains that soap doesn't quite remove. Plus the way you've been looking at things since you got here, analyzing composition, light sources. Art school." Despite everything, Natalie felt a smile tug at her mouth. "3 years before I had to drop out. You're observant." Izzy's expression softened fractionally. "Sociology grad student, observation's part of the job. What did you study?" They talked while Rosa worked, and Natalie ate a conversation that felt almost normal, discussing color theory and figure drawing and the way light changed at different times of day. Izzy had grown up here, she explained, but left for college and rarely came back except for obligations. She viewed the MC life with the kind of analytical distance that came from both proximity and rejection. Her voice held carefully controlled emotion when she said, "I watched this life destroy my mother. She left when I was 12 because she couldn't watch Dad disappear into violence and brotherhood anymore. Now I study communities and social structures and try to understand what makes people choose this." Natalie heard the unspoken question. "What made you choose this?" The answer came easily. "I didn't. I chose to prevent murder. Everything else just followed." Izzy studied her. "And now you're trapped here. Protected maybe, but trapped." Before Natalie could respond, engines rumbled outside. She moved to the window in time to see 2 Iron Vanguard members arrive on their bikes, Dylan riding passenger on one of them. He dismounted awkwardly, clearly terrified, trying to hide it behind bravado that didn't quite reach his eyes. Natalie was out the door before conscious thought, pulling her brother into a hug fierce enough that he grunted in surprise. He felt too thin still, even after 6 months of recovery, but solid, present, real. His voice cracked when he spoke. "What the hell did you get us into?" She pulled back to look at him. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't think—" Dylan cut her off. "Tell me later. Right now, I just need to know, are we safe?" Jackson's voice answered from the porch. "As safe as I can make you. Your sister saved lives today, including yours, though you don't know it yet. That earns my protection, and in this world, my protection means something." Dylan's eyes went to Jackson, sizing him up with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. For how long? Jackson's smile held no humor. "Until the threat's again or I am. Whichever comes first." They gave Natalie and Dylan one of the cabins, a simple structure with 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom, and a sitting area that looked out toward the fence line. Basic but clean, functional rather than comfortable. Dylan took the room on the left, dropping onto the bed like his legs had given out. Natalie sat in the chair by the window, staring at armed men patrolling the perimeter, trying to process how her life had become this in the space of 3 hours. Dylan's voice drifted from his room. "We can't stay here." She didn't have an answer. The truth was, they couldn't leave either. Not with threats against them, not with no place to run, not with resources that wouldn't last a week on the road. They were protected and imprisoned by the same circumstance, and the irony tasted bitter. Night fell gradually, the desert cooling from punishing heat to comfortable warmth. Rosa brought them dinner, real food, not diner scraps, which made Natalie realize how long she'd been surviving rather than eating. Dylan picked at his plate, anxiety killing his appetite the way withdrawal used to, and Natalie found herself watching him for signs of relapse, even though she knew the triggers were different now. At 9 o'clock, Natalie unpacked what little she'd brought: a change of clothes, toiletries, the sketchbook. She opened it to a blank page staring at empty white space that used to feel like possibility, but now felt like accusation. Her hand found a pencil moving without direction, and lines appeared the diner from this morning booth, 7 men she could draw from memory, even though she'd only seen them for minutes. Something crinkled in the sketchbook's spine. She frowned, flipping through pages, and found it wedged between sheets, a note folded small, hidden where only she would find it. Her hands shook as she unfolded the paper. The message was printed, block letters that could belong to anyone. You can run to the wolves, but we're patient. Mistakes must be paid for. C. C for Carter, for the first man who'd sat in booth 7. Malcolm, he'd gotten close enough to plant this. At the diner, probably during the chaos after Jackson had called for evacuation those few minutes when she'd been focused on other things. Or maybe earlier during a moment she'd looked away. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd been close enough to touch her things to send this message to prove that distance and protection were illusions she'd been foolish to believe in. Natalie stood on shaking legs and walked to the window. Outside, guards patrolled with rifles slung over their shoulders. Cameras watched from fence posts. The compound was locked down, secure, defended, and none of it felt like enough. She'd saved a life, and in doing so had marked herself for death, and the wolves she'd run to might be the only thing standing between her and violence. But they were also the reason violence had found her in the first place. She thought about Harold and his 5 grandkids, about the bullet that would have killed him if Jackson had ordered his usual black coffee. About Dylan in the next room, 6 months sober and terrified, dragged into danger because she'd whispered 2 words. About Jackson and his promise of protection, offered with the kind of certainty that came from a man who'd kept such promises before and lost people anyway. The note crumpled in her fist. Tomorrow she'd show it to Jackson, would admit that danger had gotten closer than anyone realized. Tonight she just stood at the window watching shadows move across the compound, wondering if she'd saved lives or simply delayed the inevitable. Wondering if there was a difference, wondering if she'd ever feel safe again, or if safety had been the first casualty of her choice bleeding out on the diner floor alongside the violence she'd prevented. Outside, the desert stretched empty and dark, and somewhere in that darkness, men were planning. Patient, waiting, coming. Dawn broke over the compound with the kind of silence that preceded storms. Natalie had slept in 15-minute intervals, jerking awake at every sound: engines in the distance, footsteps on gravel, the creak of settling wood. Each time consciousness returned, so did the memory. 3 men in a booth, a whispered warning, a note that proved walls and guns couldn't keep danger out when it had already marked you. She found Dylan in the kitchenette at 6 nursing coffee with hands wrapped around the mug, like he needed the warmth despite the New Mexico heat already building outside. His eyes carried the hollowed-out look she'd seen too many times before during his using days, except now it came from fear instead of chemicals. His voice rasped from disuse. Couldn't sleep either. Natalie poured her own coffee, black no sugar, then froze as the phrase triggered memory. That signal, the one that should have killed Jackson. She dumped cream in just to break the association. Too quiet here. I'm used to highway noise. Dylan's laugh held no humor. Yeah, because that's the problem. The quiet, not the armed guards or the death threats or the fact that we're hiding with a motorcycle gang. She wanted to correct him, club not gang. There was apparently a difference that mattered, but exhaustion made the distinction feel meaningless. They were trapped regardless of terminology. Movement outside caught her eye. Jackson emerged from the main house, already dressed, moving with purpose toward the garage. Even from a distance, she could read tension in his shoulders, the way he carried weight that hadn't been there yesterday. She'd given him that weight. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest. Dylan followed her gaze. You going to show him the note? The crumpled paper sat on the table between them. She'd smoothed it out after Dylan had found her at midnight, staring at the words like they'd rearranged themselves into something less threatening. He'd read it twice, then asked the question she'd been avoiding. How had they gotten close enough? Now she picked it up, folding it carefully. Yeah, he needs to know. Dylan's hands shot out, gripping her wrist. Or we could leave, right now. Take our chances on the road before this gets worse. The desperation in his voice hurt worse than the suggestion. She covered his hand with hers. It's already worse. And running just means we're targets without protection. At least here we have a chance. His grip tightened. Do we, or are we just collateral damage waiting to happen? She didn't have an answer that wouldn't be a lie. The main house smelled of coffee and something frying Rosa's work, turning the kitchen into the compound's heart, the way she'd probably done for years. Natalie found Jackson in what passed for an office, a room off the main hall, with a desk buried under maps and papers, Ghost already present, and leaning against the wall with the stillness of a man conserving energy. Jackson looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his expression. Concern, maybe, or calculation. You look like hell. Natalie placed the note on his desk. Found this in my sketchbook last night. He got close enough to plant it. At the diner, I think, during the evacuation. Ghost moved first, picking up the paper with 2 fingers like it might contaminate him. He read it face unchanging, then passed it to Jackson. The silence stretched while Jackson studied the note, his jaw working in a way that suggested he was holding back words that would only make things worse. Finally, Malcolm Cross, former member expelled 6 years ago for skimming club funds. I should have killed him then. Mercy always costs more than the alternative. The casual mention of murder should have shocked her. Instead, Natalie found herself focused on the practical. If he got this close once, he can do it again. Ghost's voice carried grim agreement. He's proving a point. That fences and guns don't mean shit if he's patient enough. Jackson stood, moving to the window that overlooked the compound. Then we stopped being defensive. Time to figure out who hired them and end this at the source. Over the next 3 days, Natalie learned the rhythm of compound life, the way members rotated guard duty, how meals happened in shifts to keep someone always watching the perimeter, the silent language of nods and gestures that conveyed information without words. She learned that Wrench had been a mechanic before joining the club, that 2 of the younger members were brothers from Albuquerque, that Rosa had lost her husband to a rival gang 8 years ago, and Jackson had given her sanctuary when she had nowhere else to go. She learned that Izzy visited once a month out of obligation, rather than desire, that her mother lived in California, and refused all contact with anyone connected to the Iron Vanguard, that the tension between father and daughter ran deep enough to have its own gravity. Dylan spent most of his time with a younger member named Liam Foster, 24, 3 years sober, the kind of recovery success story Dylan needed to see. Liam had the easy confidence of someone who'd hit bottom and clawed his way back, and Natalie watched her brother absorb it like medicine. They worked on bikes together in the garage, Liam teaching Dylan basic maintenance, both of them finding purpose in engines that made sense when nothing else did. On the 3rd afternoon, Natalie found them in the garage bay, Dylan's hands black with grease and something like peace on his face. Liam looked up from the carburetor he was rebuilding. Your brother's got good hands, natural mechanic. Dylan ducked his head, embarrassed by praise the way he always had been. Just following instructions. Liam's grin was genuine. That's half the battle. Most people can't even do that. Natalie started to respond when she noticed Liam's workbench, the toolbox sitting slightly open, pill bottle visible inside. Orange prescription label, the kind she'd seen too many times in Dylan's pockets during his using years. Her chest tightened. Liam caught her looking. Hydrocodone. Thrown shoulder 6 months ago, doc prescribed 90 pills. I keep them around as a test. Every day I don't take one is a day I prove I'm stronger than the addiction. The explanation made sense. Rational. Healthy even in a twisted way, facing temptation rather than avoiding it. But Natalie saw Dylan's eyes linger on the bottle, saw the calculation happening behind his careful expression, and fear spiked cold in her gut. She pulled Dylan aside after Liam returned to his work. You okay? His answer came too fast. Fine. Why wouldn't I be? Because she knew that look, knew the way his hands flexed when he was thinking about using, knew the micro-expressions that preceded relapse even when he thought he'd hidden them. But pushing would only make him defensive, would drive him further into whatever mental space he was constructing, so she just squeezed his arm. Just checking. I'm here if you need to talk. Dylan's smile was small but real. I know, I'm good, Nat. Really. She wanted to believe him. That evening, Ghost returned from wherever he'd spent the day with information that changed everything. He gathered Jackson, Wrench, and 3 senior members in the office, and Natalie only heard about it secondhand when Izzy found her sketching in the cabin. Izzy's voice carried urgency she usually kept masked. They found out who hired Malcolm. It's bigger than anyone thought. The details came in fragments. Ghost had contacts, people who owed him favors or feared him enough to talk. Malcolm Cross hadn't been acting alone. The Scorpion's Claw Motorcycle Club from Arizona wanted Iron Vanguard's territory, wanted it badly enough to hire outside contractors. But they weren't funding it themselves. Money came from elsewhere, from south of the border, from Los Sombras cartel. Natalie felt the floor tilt. A cartel? Why would they care about New Mexico MC territory? Izzy's expression held the kind of weary knowledge that came from growing up in this world. Distribution routes. Iron Vanguard controls highway access through this part of the state. They've kept hard drugs out for years. No meth, no heroin, nothing that destroys communities. It's one of the few decent things they do. But that means the cartel can't move product through here. Scorpion's Claw already works with them. If they take over, the whole corridor opens up. The implications spiraled outward. This wasn't about revenge or territory disputes between clubs. This was about infrastructure, about pipelines of poison flowing north, about Natalie's whispered warning, disrupting plans worth millions, about her being a loose thread in a tapestry of violence that spanned borders and jurisdictions. Izzy's hand found hers. Dad's planning something. I can see it in how he's moving, how he's talking. He's going on offense, and that means people will die. Natalie heard what Izzy wasn't saying, maybe including Jackson himself. The council meeting that night had the character of a war room. Natalie wasn't invited, but she positioned herself near the office door where sound carried through the walls, eavesdropping for the second time in a week, except now she was listening for her own survival rather than someone else's. Jackson's voice low and certain. Demons Run rally is in 2 weeks. 5,000 riders, neutral ground, perfect cover. We leaked that Natalie will be there under our protection. They'll come for her because they have to. She's evidence of their plan, and as long as she's alive, she's a threat. Ghost. You want to use her as bait, Jackson. I want to end this. We can't hide forever, and Malcolm won't stop. This draws him out, gets Scorpion's Claw leadership in one place where we can record them admitting cartel ties. Then we hand everything to the FBI and let federal jurisdiction handle it. Wrench's skepticism came through clearly. That's assuming they talk, assuming they don't just shoot her and disappear into the crowd. Jackson, they'll talk because they think they're smarter than us, and smart people like to explain how clever they are. Snake's voice harsh with anger. And if this goes wrong, if she gets killed, we're just okay with that risk. The silence stretched long enough that Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. Then Jackson, quieter than before. No, we're not, which is why we do this right, with every precaution, every backup plan. But doing nothing guarantees they pick us off one by one until there's nothing left to protect. The meeting broke up after another 20 minutes of logistics and contingencies. Natalie retreated to the cabin before anyone could catch her, listening, her mind racing through what she'd heard. They wanted to use her as bait, to draw killers out into the open and record their confession, to risk her life on the assumption that Jackson's planning and Ghost's execution would be enough to keep her breathing. She should refuse, should demand they find another way, should protect herself the way she'd protected Dylan for years, by saying no to risks that seemed calculated, but were really just gambling with higher stakes. Instead, she found herself thinking about Harold and his grandkids, about the distribution routes that would open if Iron Vanguard fell, about Dylan and Liam and every other person fighting to stay clean in a world that kept pushing poison, about the fact that running meant this never ended, meant looking over her shoulder forever, meant living in fear until fear became the only thing left. Dylan found her at midnight, sitting on the cabin's small porch and staring at stars that looked different here than they had from her apartment, clearer, closer, like she could reach up and touch them. He sat beside her without speaking, waiting the way he'd learned in group therapy, giving space for truth to emerge in its own time. Finally, they want to use me as bait, at some rally, to draw out Malcolm and the people who hired him. Dylan's breath caught. Are you going to do it? She turned to look at him, 23 years old, still carrying the softness of youth under features sharpened by addiction and recovery. Her baby brother, who'd been 6 when their father left, and 12 when their mother died, and 17 when he'd first stuck a needle in his arm. If I don't, this doesn't end. Not really. We hide here or we run somewhere else, but they keep looking. And you can't get your life back if you're always running. His voice cracked. I can't lose you. You're all I have. Natalie pulled him close, feeling him shake against her shoulder. Then I'll have to make sure you don't. But Dee, I need to know, are you okay? Really okay, because I saw you looking at Liam's pills and I know that look. Dylan pulled back, wiping his eyes. I won't lie, I saw them and I wanted them. For about 10 seconds, I wanted them so bad, I could taste it. But then Liam said something about how every day he doesn't use is a victory, and I realized I've got 6 months of victories, 183 days of winning, and I don't want to lose that count. She held his face between her hands. You're stronger than you know, but if it gets hard, if you feel yourself slipping. Dylan nodded. I'll tell you, promise. She wanted to believe him, had to believe him, because faith was all she had left to give. The week before the rally passed in careful preparation. Ghost taught Natalie how to wear a wire without it being obvious, how to angle her body to get clear audio, how to stay calm when every instinct screamed to run. Wrench showed her how to read escape routes in crowded spaces, how to identify which faces in a crowd were actively watching versus passively present. Jackson spent hours going over contingencies, what to do if the plan failed, if she got separated, if violence erupted before they had the evidence they needed. She learned to ride as a passenger, trusting the driver's balance, and decisions learned the hand signals that meant slow down, speed, up, danger ahead. She learned leather and boots and how to tie her hair back so it wouldn't blind her at highway speeds. She learned the weight of a .38 Special in a thigh holster compact and accessible, and how to draw it without thinking. Ghost made her practice until muscle memory took over, until her hand moved to the gun the way it had once moved to a paintbrush automatic, natural an extension of intention. Izzy watched all of this with increasing frustration that finally boiled over 4 days before departure. She cornered Natalie in the main house kitchen, voice low, but intensity burning through. You don't have to do this. You don't owe them anything. Natalie kept folding the clothes Rosa had given her, proper riding gear, reinforced leather. I owe myself, I owe Dylan. I owe every person who'll suffer if cartel poison floods this territory. Izzy's laugh was bitter. That's the justification they use. Protection, community, righteousness. It's how they sleep at night after doing terrible things. The words landed like accusations. Your father's trying to help me. Izzy leaned against the counter, arms crossed. My father's using you to solve his problem. There's a difference. He's good at making people think they're choosing to help when really they're being maneuvered into position. Natalie set down the shirt she'd been folding. Then what would you have me do? Run, hide, hope they forget about me? Izzy's expression softened. I'd have you choose yourself, not some greater good, not Dylan's future, not strangers you'll never meet. I'd have you ask what Natalie wants, then do that. The question hit harder than expected. What did she want? She'd spent so long surviving, caring for Dylan, sacrificing dreams for necessity, that want had become theoretical. Something other people had, people whose lives weren't constructed from scar tissue and compromise. But Izzy was offering escape. She said it plainly. Come with me tonight. I'll drive you and Dylan to California. My friend has a place. You start over away from all this. Natalie felt the offer's pull, that seductive fantasy of walking away, leaving violence and danger for someone else to handle. She could be a waitress in California, could paint on weekends, could rebuild something resembling a normal life from the wreckage of the last week. And Malcolm would keep hunting. The scorpion's claw would keep expanding. The cartel would keep moving poison through routes the Iron Vanguard currently blocked. Dylan would keep looking over his shoulder, his recovery built on sand that shifted with every threat they ran from. Natalie's voice came steady. If I run, they'll keep hunting. Dylan will never be safe. This ends at the rally, or it doesn't end. Izzy's face hardened. You're becoming like them. The accusation should have stung. Instead, Natalie felt a strange clarity. Maybe that's what it takes to survive. Izzy straightened, disappointment evident. My mother said the same thing. Right before she left, she told me she'd tried to understand, tried to adapt, tried to become someone who could live in this world. And it destroyed who she was until she couldn't recognize herself anymore. She moved to the door, paused. When this is over, if you survive it, look in the mirror. and see if you recognize the person looking back. Because the cost of survival isn't always measured in scars you can see. Then she was gone, leaving Natalie alone with leather and weapons and questions that had no good answers. The night before the rally, Jackson found Natalie in the garage where she'd been checking the bike she'd ride behind a Harley-Davidson Street Glide, all chrome and power and intimidation. She'd been running her hands over the engine housing like it could tell her something about tomorrow, about whether faith in Jackson's plan was justified or just another form of surrender. His voice carried across the space. "You're scared." She didn't turn around. Terrified. His boots scuffed concrete as he approached. "Good. Fear keeps you alive, makes you careful. It's when you stop being afraid that mistakes happen." Natalie finally looked at him. This man whose life she'd saved, who'd promised protection, who was now asking her to trust him with everything. "You can't promise I'll survive this." Jackson's honesty was refreshing in its starkness. "No, I can't. People die when plans go wrong, and plans always go wrong somewhere. But I can promise I'll do everything in my power to bring you home. And in my world, that promise means something." The weight of his conviction almost made her believe. Almost. She turned back to the bike. "Izzy thinks you're using me." Jackson didn't deny it. "I am. Just like you're using me for protection, for resources, for a way to end this that doesn't leave you running forever. We're all using each other. The question is whether it's honest use, whether we're clear about the one." Natalie's laugh surprised her. "That's a hell of a philosophy." His expression might have been a smile. "It's the only one that works in this life. Pretty lies get people killed. Ugly truth at least gives them a chance." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the garage quiet, except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of Dylan's laughter from somewhere outside, Liam probably telling stories that made recovery feel possible. Jackson's voice dropped lower. "I won't let them hurt you. I promise." Natalie wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that promises made in garages at midnight carried weight against bullets and betrayal. "You can't promise that. You said it yourself, plans go wrong." His hand covered hers where it rested on the bike's seat. "I can, and I do, because you saved my life and that creates debts that don't get paid with words. You'll understand that eventually." She should have pulled away, should have maintained distance and perspective. Instead, she let his hand stay, let the contact ground her, let herself feel something other than fear for the first time in days. Not safety exactly, but the possibility of it, the shape it might take if she survived long enough to claim it. Then Jackson's phone buzzed. He checked it, face going neutral in the way that meant bad news. "Dylan's in the infirmary." Natalie's heart stopped. What happened? Jackson was already moving. "Rosa found him. Possible overdose." "Come on." The infirmary was just a room in the main house with medical supplies and a cot, but Rosa had nursing training and kept it functional. Dylan lay on the cot, conscious but gray-faced, Rosa checking his pulse, while Liam stood against the wall looking destroyed. Natalie dropped to her knees beside the cot. "D, what did you take?" Dylan's voice was small. "Nothing, I swear. I felt dizzy and then everything went sideways." Rosa's tone was professional but gentle. "Panic attack, I think. Heart rate elevated but not dangerous. Blood pressure normal. Pupils reactive. Not overdose." The relief nearly knocked Natalie flat. She gripped Dylan's hand. "You're okay. You're okay." Dylan's eyes were wet. "I saw Liam's pills and I wanted them. I didn't take them, but I wanted them, and then I started thinking about you going to that rally and dying and me being alone again, and I couldn't breathe and—" She pulled him into a hug, feeling him shake. "I'm here. I'm right here." Over Dylan's shoulder, she caught Liam's expression, guilt and understanding mixing into something complex. He pushed off the wall. "This is my fault. Keeping those pills around, I thought I was proving something, but I was just putting temptation in front of someone fighting the same fight." He pulled the orange bottle from his pocket, walked to the sink, and without ceremony dumped all 90 pills down the drain. Turned on the water, watched them dissolve and disappear. Liam's voice carried weight. "There, gone. No more tests, just living clean, day by day." Dylan watched the last of the pills vanish. "You didn't have to do that." Liam's smile was sad. "Yeah, I did, because if you relapse because I was trying to prove I'm strong, that's on me, and I can't carry that." Rosa cleared them out after another 20 minutes of observation, declaring Dylan stable but needing rest. Natalie walked him back to the cabin awareness, growing that her brother was more fragile than she'd admitted, that his 6 months of sobriety were built on foundation that could crack under pressure she was about to apply. At the cabin door, Dylan stopped her. "Don't do it. Tomorrow. Don't go to that rally. I can't lose you, and I'm not strong enough to survive if I do." The truth was she'd already decided. Had decided when she'd whispered to Jackson maybe, or when she'd seen the note, or when she'd understood that running meant living in fear forever. But Dylan's plea made her question everything again, whether she was being brave or selfish, whether survival was worth the cost if it broke the person she was trying to protect. She kissed his forehead like she had when he was little. "I'll come back, I promise." Dylan's voice was barely audible. Mom promised that too, right before the cancer took her. The words hung between them, truth that couldn't be argued, history that couldn't be changed. Their mother had promised and broken that promise through no fault of her own, and Natalie was about to walk into danger making the same guarantee with even less certainty. She had no answer that wouldn't be a lie. Inside, Natalie packed the small bag she'd carry tomorrow, ID, phone, the wire ghost would tape to her skin before departure. She opened her sketchbook to a blank page and stared at it, pencil hovering, trying to draw something that would matter if she died. But nothing came. Just white space and fear, and the sound of Dylan crying quietly in the next room. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, she walked the compound perimeter. Guards nodded as she passed, recognizing her, now accepting her presence the way water accepts new channels. She ended up at the fence line, staring out at desert that stretched dark and infinite, and tried to remember who she'd been a week ago. The waitress who poured coffee and sketched in margins and believed survival was enough. That woman felt like someone she'd invented. A story she'd told herself about safety and control and the ability to stay separate from violence through careful living and conscious choice. The note had destroyed that illusion, proving that distance was meaningless when danger decided to close it. So tomorrow she'd ride to a rally with 5,000 bikers and draw out men who wanted her dead and trust that Jackson's plan was enough to keep her breathing. She'd become bait because bait at least had purpose, agency, the ability to choose how the trap was sprung. She thought about Izzy's question, who do you become when survival requires becoming someone else? She thought about her mother's promise and how death honored no one's word. She thought about Dylan and Liam and pills dissolving in a drain, about addiction and recovery, and how thin the line between them remained. She thought about Jackson's hand on hers, his promise that meant something in a world where promises usually meant nothing. And when dawn broke 2 hours later, she was still standing at the fence, watching light spread across the desert, preparing to gamble everything on a plan that felt equal parts desperation and hope. The Demons Run rally grounds sprawled across 40 acres of desert outside Flagstaff, transformed from empty scrubland into a temporary city of leather and chrome and noise. 5,000 motorcycles created a sound that wasn't quite music, more like the heartbeat of some massive mechanical beast, all thunder and growl, and the occasional sharp crack of exhaust backfire that made Natalie flinch despite knowing it wasn't gunfire. She rode behind Jackson, pressed against his back, feeling every shift of his weight as he navigated through the chaos. The wire tape between her breasts itched where sweat made the adhesive pull at skin, and the small pistol at her thigh felt simultaneously too heavy and not heavy enough. Ghost rode to their left, Wrench to the right, 3 other Iron Vanguard members forming a loose diamond around them, protection that looked casual but was anything but. They'd arrived at noon, parked in the Iron Vanguard section, where familiar faces nodded acknowledgement and unfamiliar ones assessed threat level. The rally operated under strict rules. No club violence on neutral ground, disputes settled privately or taken elsewhere, a fragile peace maintained by mutual agreement that breaking it brought consequences from all sides. Malcolm would have to be careful here. So would they. Natalie dismounted, legs shaky from 3 hours on the bike, and tried to look like she belonged. Leather pants, boots, Iron Vanguard shirt that marked her as property, even though she wasn't, hair pulled back in a braid that kept it from her face. She'd practiced this look in mirrors, trying to embody confidence she didn't feel, but standing here with thousands of strangers pressing close, she felt exposed in ways no clothing could fix. Jackson's voice carried over the noise. "Stay close, don't wander. You see Malcolm or his people, you signal Ghost immediately." She nodded, throat too tight for words. The rally was part festival, part market, part reunion. Vendors selling everything from custom parts to leather goods to drugs that would have gotten them arrested anywhere. Law enforcement gave a damn. Music blasted from stages at opposite ends of the grounds, competing genres creating sonic chaos. Women in various states of undress moved through crowds, some affiliated with clubs, some independent, all navigating the particular rules that govern this space. Natalie had never felt more out of place or more visible. Ghost appeared at her elbow, voice low. Victor Santos, 3 o'clock. Gray ponytail, black cut, no patches. Natalie's eyes found him without turning her head, the professional, the one with military discipline and predator's patience. He stood near a vendor booth, apparently examining custom exhausts, but his attention was elsewhere. On her. The realization sent ice through her veins. Jackson's hand found the small of her back. He's confirming you're here. Good. Means the leak worked. They'd planted information carefully, letting it slip through channels that Natalie would be at the rally under Iron Vanguard protection, that she was weak link they needed to eliminate before she could testify about what she'd overheard. The bait was set. Now they waited for the trap to spring. 2 hours passed in careful movement through the rally. Jackson played his role, perfectly protective but not paranoid, keeping Natalie close but allowing her apparent freedom, stopping to talk with other club presidents, maintaining the fiction that this was normal attendance, rather than carefully orchestrated operation. Natalie's face hurt from holding expressions that didn't match her terror. Her body ached from tension that wouldn't release, and the wire between her breasts felt like it was broadcasting her deception to everyone who looked at her. At 3 o'clock, Jackson kissed her forehead with theatrical affection. Going to talk business with the Devil's Disciples president. You stay with Ghost. Natalie watched him walk away, knowing this was the plan, create opportunity for Malcolm to approach without Jackson's immediate presence. Make her look vulnerable. But knowing didn't stop her chest from tightening or her hand from drifting toward the gun at her thigh. Ghost positioned himself 10 feet away, close enough to intervene, but far enough to not prevent approach. Wrench browsed a nearby vendor, his casual stance fooling no one who understood violence. 3 other Iron Vanguard members drifted through the crowd, maintaining perimeter without being obvious about it. Natalie stood near a booth selling custom leatherwork, pretending interest in jackets she'd never wear, and waited. Malcolm found her at 3:15. He materialized from the crowd like he'd been there all along, just waiting for the right moment. Natalie Harper, the waitress who couldn't mind her business. She turned, forcing steadiness into her voice. I don't know what you're talking about. His smile held no warmth. Don't insult us both. You whispered to Jackson. We saw you. Now we're here to discuss consequences. Ryan appeared behind him, the kid from the diner, looking sick, but determined, hands shaking, but present. And Victor moving to her left, cutting off one escape route with casual efficiency. Natalie's awareness expanded, taking in Ghost's subtle shift in position, Wrench's hand inside his jacket, the way other Iron Vanguard members were converging without seeming to. The wire between her breasts felt suddenly terrifyingly fragile. If they searched her, Malcolm's voice pulled her back. Who told you about our plan? Who else knew we were coming? The question confused her. No one told me. I overheard you. Booth 7, remember? You weren't exactly quiet. Victor spoke for the first time, his voice flat. Convenient story, or maybe Iron Vanguard sent you to infiltrate to play innocent civilian while gathering intelligence. Natalie's laugh was genuine and slightly hysterical. I'm a waitress with $50,000 in debt and a brother in recovery. I don't infiltrate anything. I just didn't want people to die over breakfast. Malcolm's expression darkened. Noble. Stupid but noble. Unfortunately, your heroism cost us everything. Time to settle accounts. Movement to their right, a man Natalie hadn't seen before, older, maybe 55, with the kind of casual authority that suggested leadership. His cut bore patches she didn't recognize, Scorpion's Claw MC Arizona. Ghost had shown her pictures during prep. Hector Diablo Cruz president. Hector's voice carried the weight of finality. Enough talk. Time for lessons about interfering in business that doesn't concern you. Victor's hand moved inside his jacket. Malcolm's eyes went cold. Ryan looked ready to bolt or vomit, possibly both. Then Victor froze. His gaze swept the area, cataloging faces and positions with professional speed and something in his expression shifted. Wait, something's wrong. Too convenient. Malcolm frowned. What are you, when? Victor moved fast, grabbing Natalie's jacket and yanking it open despite her attempts to pull away. His fingers found the wire taped to her sternum, ripped it free with brutal efficiency. She's recording. It's a trap. Malcolm's face transformed from calculated menace to pure rage. He grabbed the wire, crushed it under his boot. You stupid bitch. You think you can ghost and wrench move simultaneously, weapons appearing with practiced speed. Step away from her. But Scorpion's claw had come prepared. 15 members emerged from the crowd surrounding them in a loose circle that tightened with every second. Other rally attendees backed away, creating space, recognizing violence about to erupt and wanting no part of it. Hector's voice cut through rising tension. You brought a war to neutral ground. That breaks rally rules, Iron Vanguard. Every club here has right to punish that violation. Other clubs watched, making no move to intervene. The unspoken message was clear. This was between Iron Vanguard and Scorpion's Claw. Let them settle it. Jackson pushed through the crowd, fury and calculation warring in his expression. Let her go. Your fight is with me, Crime. Hector smiled without humor. Your fight cost us cartel contract. $3 million. Someone pays. Malcolm's hands closed around Natalie's throat before she could react, pulling her back against his chest knife. Appearing at her, carotid, you took everything from me 6 years ago. Called me thief. Destroyed my reputation. Now I take everything from you. The world narrowed to the knife's edge, and Malcolm's breath hot against her ear and the pressure of his arm across her windpipe. Ghost's gun was up, but he had no shot. Wrench was frozen, unable to act without risking her death. Jackson's face had gone, white hands raised in placation. Ryan's voice cracked through the standoff. Mal, this isn't right. She's just my brother was innocent too. This doesn't fix anything. Malcolm's grip tightened. Ryan, you're with us or against us? Ryan's gun came up, but his hands shook violently. I wanted justice for Eric. Not this. Not killing civilians who were trying to help people. His weapon lowered slowly, realization spreading across his face that he'd been manipulated into something he couldn't justify. The crack of the gunshot came from behind Ryan. He jerked forward, blood spreading across his back, collapsing to his knees, then face first into dirt. Victor stood behind where Ryan had been, his pistol still raised, expression utterly empty. Weakness is a liability. Screaming erupted, the crowd scattered. Multiple clubs reached for weapons, the neutral ground's peace shattering like glass under pressure. Ryan's blood soaked into Arizona dirt, his body twitching once, then going still. And Natalie felt something inside her break at the casual brutality of it. Malcolm's knife pressed harder. Everyone back up or she dies. Jackson's voice carried desperate command. Malcolm, think you kill her. You die next. There's no walking away from this. Hector and Victor were already moving, pulling Malcolm back toward where Scorpion's claw bikes were parked, using Natalie as shield. Ghost and Wrench tracked them but couldn't shoot without hitting her. Jackson followed, hands still raised, and Natalie could see calculation in his eyes, measuring distance angles, probability of success versus catastrophic failure. Then sirens. Distant but approaching fast. Someone had called authorities, or maybe rally security had decided violence exceeded acceptable parameters. Either way, law enforcement was coming. Hector cursed, move now. Malcolm dragged Natalie toward the bikes. She fought pure instinct overriding fear, remembering everything Ghost had taught her about breaking holds. Her elbow found Malcolm's ribs, her heel, his shin, and his grip loosened enough that she twisted away. The knife sliced across her shoulder as she broke free, pain immediate and clarifying. She fell, rolled, came up running toward Jackson, toward safety, toward anything that wasn't Malcolm's hands. Gunfire erupted. She couldn't tell who shot first. Scorpion's Claw or Iron Vanguard or some third party deciding this was their business after all. She hit the ground behind a vendor booth, hands over her head, surrounded by chaos and thunder and the smell of gunpowder. Jackson's body covered hers, heavy and protective, his voice in her ear. Stay down, don't move. The firefight lasted maybe 40 seconds, but felt eternal. When silence finally fell, broken only by groaning wounded and distant sirens growing closer, Natalie lifted her head to survey damage. 4 bodies on the ground. Ryan, two Scorpions Claw members she didn't recognize, and one Iron Vanguard prospect who'd been in the wrong position when shooting started. 12 others wounded, blood spreading across dirt, some crawling toward cover, some lying still waiting for help. Malcolm and Hector had escaped in the chaos. Victor, two professionals, survived through knowing when to retreat, but they'd left evidence behind, left bodies and witnesses, left a mess that law enforcement would have to process. Jackson pulled Natalie to her feet, checking her shoulder where blood soaked through leather. Flesh wound. You'll live. Can you walk? She nodded, shock making everything feel distant and unreal. Ghost appeared, phone already out. Cops in 2 minutes. We need to go or we're all detained. They moved fast, Iron Vanguard members covering their retreat, heading for bikes. The rally security was focused on wounded and containing panic, not stopping departures. By the time police vehicles screamed into the grounds, Iron Vanguard was already on Highway 40, riding hard toward New Mexico, leaving evidence and bodies, and Ryan's blank eyes staring at sky behind them. The compound felt like sanctuary after the rally's violence. Natalie sat in the infirmary while Rosa cleaned and stitched her shoulder 7 stitches to close the knife wound that could have been so much worse if she'd been slower or Malcolm had cut deeper. Dylan hovered nearby, face white, having heard abbreviated version of events from Ghost upon their return. His voice shook. You could have died. Natalie winced as Rosa pulled thread through skin. But I didn't. Dylan's hands balled into fists. Because you got lucky. Because that kid hesitated. Because you could fight free. What if any of those things had gone different? She didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like platitude or dismissal of legitimate fear. Jackson entered as Rosa tied off final stitch. His expression held something Natalie couldn't quite read. Guilt, anger, calculation, all mixed into exhaustion. FBI raided Scorpion's Claw clubhouse 3 hours ago. Ghost's contacts came through. They arrested Hector, 15 senior members seized records that prove cartel connections. Natalie processed that, Ghost's contacts, in the FBI. Jackson's silence was confirmation. Understanding crashed over her. He's an informant. Ghost is FBI. Jackson's jaw tightened. Was, for 2 years, building case against Los Sombras distribution network. Your situation, accelerated timeline, gave them excuse to move. The implications spiraled. So everything the rally using me as bait, all of it was set up to create evidence for federal case. Oh, Jackson's voice carried exhaustion. To protect you, to end the threat, to stop cartel expansion before it destroys communities. All of those things. Natalie stood Rosa protesting that she should rest, but she ignored it. Ryan died. 4 people died today. For what federal case statistics? Jackson's eyes flashed. Ryan died because Victor Santos decided he was liability. Those others died because Scorpion's Claw chose violence. Not us, not you. She wanted to scream at him, to rage about manipulation and using people as pawns. But exhaustion and pain and fear drained everything except hollow anger that had nowhere to land. Where's Ghost now? Jackson's answer came flat. FBI custody, witness protection deal already in process. He's gone. The betrayal felt personal, even though Ghost had never been hers to be betrayed by. He'd been undercover from the start, playing role, using them all to build his case. And it had worked. Cartel connections, exposed Scorpions, Claw dismantled evidence sufficient for federal prosecutors. Malcolm and Victor were still out there, still dangerous, still hunting, but the infrastructure supporting them had collapsed. Dylan approached slowly. What happens now? Jackson's response carried weight of finality. FBI wants Natalie's testimony, full immunity, protected witness if needed. This goes to trial. Her evidence puts people away forever. Natalie's laugh was bitter. And I'm supposed to trust that, trust the same system that used me as bait without full disclosure. Jackson's expression softened fractionally. You're supposed to survive. Everything else is negotiation. 2 weeks passed in strange limbo. Natalie and Dylan remained at compound while lawyers and FBI agents negotiated terms of testimony, immunity deals, protection arrangements. Iron Vanguard faced RICO investigations of their own. Ghost information hadn't been limited to Scorpion's Claw, and federal prosecutors wanted to clean up multiple organizations simultaneously. Jackson spent hours with attorneys preparing defense that would keep him and core members out of prison. Snake left rather than face charges, taking 3 junior members with him. Wrench stayed loyal to the end. Rosa continued managing compound like nothing had changed even as everything shifted around them. Izzy visited once, her expression holding complicated mixture of vindication and concern. You survived. I'm glad, but you look different. Natalie examined her reflection in bathroom mirror, later searching for the change Izzy had noted. Same face, same features. But something behind her eyes had hardened. Some naive assumption about safety and distance, and the ability to stay separate from violence through careful living had been burned away. She'd become someone who carried knife scars and knew how to draw weapons, and understood that survival sometimes meant trusting people who used you because being used was better than being dead. The trial happened 6 months later. Federal courthouse, high security, dozens of defendants, including Hector Cruz, Malcolm Cross, and senior members of Los Sombras cartel leadership. Victor Santos remained at large, last seen crossing into Canada, considered low priority compared to organizational leadership. Natalie took the stand wearing clothes Rosa had helped select, professional, forgettable, designed to make her look like victim rather than participant. The prosecutor walked her through events, the diner, the overheard conversation, the warning, the escalation, the rally. She recounted everything, her voice steady even when defense attorneys tried to rattle her with accusations of cooperation or infiltration. Malcolm Cross stared at her from defendant's table, his expression promising violence that would never be delivered from inside federal prison. Hector looked bored, like this was inconvenient rather than life-ending. The cartel members showed no emotion at all. During recess, Jackson appeared in the hallway. He'd cut deal, reduced sentence, 8 years federal prison in exchange for testimony about territorial agreements and club operations. Ghost information had been thorough enough that fighting charges would have been futile. They stood in uncomfortable silence, security and lawyers hovering at respectful distance. Jackson spoke first. I'm sorry for everything, for involving you, for not being straight about Ghost 4. Natalie cut him off. Are you sorry you got caught or sorry for the choices? His honesty was stark, both, maybe. I don't know anymore. I tried to protect people, and it cost everything anyway. She studied him, this man who'd been kingpin and protector and manipulator and victim all at once. That's the first honest thing you've said. Jackson's smile was sad. Prison gives you time to get honest. 8 years of nothing but time. The verdict came 3 days later. Guilty across the board. Hector Cruz got 40 years. Malcolm Cross, 35. Cartel leadership life sentences. Jackson Mercer, 8 years, eligible for parole after 5 with good behavior. Natalie watched sentencing from gallery, Dylan beside her, both of them processing the fact that violence had consequences, but those consequences distributed unevenly across participants. After, in courthouse bathroom, Izzy found her, you could have gone anywhere after this. Started over. Why stay? The question had weight. FBI had offered witness protection, full relocation, new identity. Natalie had refused. Instead, she'd used the witness payment, substantial, intended to compensate for disrupted life, as down payment on Silver Creek Diner. Her answer came simple. Because I did start over. Right where I was. 1 year after the rally, Natalie stood in her diner, renamed Second Chance's, new sign and fresh paint and menu expanded beyond basic breakfast, pouring coffee for morning regulars. Dylan worked the grill, 18 months sober, learning cooking from Jake, who'd stayed on as consultant. The debt from their mother's illness was paid. Dylan's rent was covered. For first time in years, Natalie could breathe without calculating survival margins. The door opened. Harold walked in, same time as always, same gentle smile, pictures of grandkids already coming out of wallet before he sat. Emma was 8 now, Tyler 6, Sophia walking and talking. He'd bought them all ice cream last Sunday and wanted Natalie to know how happy they'd been. She poured his coffee and thought about bullets that hadn't killed him, about chaos that hadn't touched him, about the cost of prevention and whether it was worth paying. Rosa appeared at noon, starting her afternoon shift. She'd left the compound when Iron Vanguard dissolved, when Jackson's imprisonment and Ghost betrayal had fractured organizational structure beyond repair. Natalie had hired her immediately, grateful for familiar face and capable hands. They worked in comfortable silence, the rhythm of diner life, both familiar and transformed. Natalie had hung her artwork on the walls, desert landscapes, portraits of Dylan, at various stages of recovery, abstract pieces that expressed things she couldn't verbalize. Some sold, most didn't. She painted anyway, reclaiming parts of herself she'd thought were permanently lost. Izzy visited weekly teaching sociology at nearby college. Their friendship deepened by shared trauma and mutual understanding. She still thought Natalie had been used, still believed the cost had been too high, but she'd stopped arguing about it. Some things couldn't be changed, only endured and eventually integrated into whatever came after. 5 years later, on a Thursday morning that felt like any other, until it wasn't, the door opened at 7:30, the exact time Jackson used to arrive during his ritual visits. Natalie looked up from refilling Harold's coffee, and her breath caught. Jackson Mercer stood in the doorway, older by 5 years of incarceration, grayer, quieter, carrying himself with careful humility that hadn't existed before prison had stripped away certain certainties. Early release, she'd learned later, good behavior in overcrowding, and lawyers who knew how to work the system. He moved to the counter to seat 3 specifically and sat without speaking. Natalie approached with coffee pot, heart doing complicated things in her chest. They'd written irregular letters that covered surface topics while avoiding anything substantial. She'd visited twice, awkward conversations in visiting room with guards watching. But seeing him here in her space wearing civilian clothes instead of MC leather or prison orange felt surreal. Long silence stretched between them. Finally, Jackson's voice rough with disuse. "I don't know what to order." Natalie set down the pot. "You used to get black coffee, no sugar." His smile was fractional. That was a different person. She sat beside him, not serving equal. "What does this person want?" Jackson's expression held something vulnerable she'd never seen before. "Honestly, I don't know. Everything's different. I thought I'd come here and it would feel familiar, but it doesn't. You don't look the same, the diner doesn't. Even Harold looks different." Harold waved from his spot 6 seats down, acknowledging Jackson without judgment. In small towns, people remembered, but they also made space for redemption if you showed up willing to do the work. Natalie studied Jackson's hands, rougher than before, scarred in new places, no longer adorned with rings that had marked status. "I thought about you, sometimes. Wondered if you blamed me." His response was immediate. "For what you saved my life. Twice at the diner and by forcing me to see what I'd become." She wanted to believe that. Wanted to accept easy narrative of redemption and growth and lessons learned. But she'd become someone who questioned easy narratives. And now Jackson met her eyes. "Now I'm starting over. Construction job, small apartment, trying to build something that doesn't require violence to maintain. Izzy's talking to me again. Slowly, with boundaries, but talking." Natalie heard what he wasn't saying. "I'm alone. I'm scared. I don't know who I am without the club and the power and the identity I built over decades." Her voice gentled. "I was wondering if maybe we could be friends." Jackson's expression flickered with something, hope, maybe a relief. "Friends." She nodded. "Start somewhere simple. No expectations, no complications. Just 2 people who survived the same nightmare trying to figure out what comes after." Jackson's shoulders relaxed fractionally. "I can do friends." They sat in comfortable silence while Natalie poured coffee with cream and sugar, this time breaking old patterns, building new ones. Dylan emerged from the kitchen, nodded to Jackson with wary respect, returned to his work. Rosa served other customers with efficiency that came from years of practice. Harold showed pictures of grandkids who kept growing, kept living, kept proving that prevention mattered. The morning light slanted through windows, illuminating dust motes and coffee steam, and the careful distance between 2 people learning to trust again. Outside, Highway 40 carried traffic past the diner, travelers and truckers, and people heading somewhere with purpose or running from somewhere they couldn't stay. Natalie thought about the woman she'd been 7 years ago, pouring coffee and sketching in margins, and believing distance could keep her safe. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder and softer simultaneously, someone who understood that safety was fiction, but community was choice. Jackson's voice pulled her back. "Thank you for not giving up on the possibility that people can change." She squeezed his hand. "We're all changing, every day. Question is whether we change towards something better or just different." They talked for an hour's surface conversation that laid groundwork for deeper ones later, testing whether friendship was possible between people with their history. It felt tentative and strange, and somehow right, like finding familiar path that had been overgrown but not entirely lost. When Jackson finally left, promising to return next week, Natalie stood at the window watching him walk to the bus stop. No motorcycle, no leather, no pack of loyal members. Just a man trying to figure out how to be something other than what he'd been. Dylan appeared at her shoulder. You think he's really changed? Natalie considered that. I think he's trying. That's all anyone can do. Dylan nodded slowly, like me, like you, like everyone who comes in here looking for second chances. She turned to look at her brother, 29, now healthy, employed, building life from ruins of addiction and trauma. Yeah, like all of us. They returned to work, the diner's rhythm absorbing them back into routine that felt sacred in its ordinariness. Coffee poured, orders called, conversations flowing between people who'd found sanctuary in this space between highway and desert. Years later, when people asked Natalie about the scars on her shoulder, or the way she sometimes tensed at sudden movements, or why she'd chosen to stay when she could have gone anywhere, she'd tell them it was complicated. That survival was negotiation between who you were and who circumstances demanded you become. That heroism looked less like brave choices and more like showing up despite fear day after day, choosing to build instead of run. She'd tell them about Dylan, 8 years sober, and managing second chances when she needed time to paint. About Rosa, whose son visited from Mexico every Christmas, safe because cartel influence in the region had collapsed. About Izzy, whose research on community resilience earned awards while her relationship with her father slowly healed. She'd tell them about Harold, who died peacefully at 83, surrounded by grandkids who never knew how close they'd come to losing him over breakfast one Thursday morning. And she'd tell them about Jackson, who came in every Thursday at 7:30 for coffee with cream and sugar, who worked construction and attended meetings and slowly rebuilt something resembling peace, who looked at her sometimes with gratitude and regret, tangled too deeply to separate, who'd learned that protection wasn't ownership and survival didn't require violence. But mostly she'd tell them about the moment she'd leaned close to a stranger and whispered two words that changed everything. How one choice could ripple outward, how prevention was invisible in ways that made it easy to discount, how the cost of action and inaction both demanded payment, but only one let you sleep at night. She'd tell them she'd paid that cost willingly, that she'd make the same choice again, that second chances were earned through showing up, through choosing community over safety, through understanding that distance from violence was privilege not everyone possessed. And when they asked if it was worth it, the fear, the trauma, the years of rebuilding, she'd gesture around the diner, at Dylan flipping eggs with practiced ease, at Rosa greeting regulars by name, at artwork covering walls that used to be blank, at the sign outside that promised exactly what it delivered. She'd smile and say yes. Every scar, every nightmare, every moment of terror and doubt, because the alternative was living small, staying separate, pretending safety came from not engaging with the world's complications. And that wasn't living. That was just waiting to die. The highway hummed with traffic. The desert stretched eternal. Inside second chances, people gathered to eat and talk and find brief sanctuary from whatever they were running toward or away from. And Natalie poured coffee sketched in margins during slow hours and built life from the ruins of who she'd been forced to become. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was hers, earned through choices that cost everything and gave back just enough to make the cost worth bearing. And some mornings when light hit just right and Dylan laughed at something Rosa said, and Jackson walked through the door carrying hope instead of violence, some mornings that felt like redemption.